So today's video is a bit different from what I normally do. In this video, I'd like to show you some of my clay that I like to work with. This is polymer clay, so it's not a real clay. It's plastic based, made to behave like clay, so it's oven bakeable. And I'm still a beginner. I'm not very good at this stuff, but I really enjoy it. I buy my white and my black in a big 1-pound brick, and then my other colors in 2 ounces. I'm trying to stick to the primary colors and mix them together as needed. I've got dark red because the local craft store didn't have it available in red in the brand that I'm using. And there was the blue and the yellow. And then I've got this scrap of green left over. So generally, I've only tried one real 3D project so far, and it didn't turn out so well. I'll show it later on. But most of my projects that I've done are 2D with only a slightly raised surface. I'm building up to doing some bigger things. I usually start by taking a small square out of this tracing paper pad, and I tape it over the surface of my phone, lock the screen so that my phone screen doesn't move, and I use my phone as a light box to trace a base image that I want to build off of. So I'll give you a demonstration of what I would do next. Here are all the tools that I have used with my clay. Since I've gotten the machine, this pasta machine, this specific one was sold as a clay machine, but it really is just the same thing as a pasta machine. I've used it to start pretty much any project since I've gotten the machine, and I roll out the clay to a specific thickness. Then I would lay it out on a sheet of usually parchment paper. This is tracing paper because I didn't have a clean sheet of parchment paper readily available. It can go on any sort of kind of waxy paper because a regular drawing paper or printer paper would leach the oil out of the clay and it wouldn't be usable anymore. At this point, if I had a tracing paper template, I'd lay that over the clay, and then I'd use my X-Acto knife to cut directly through the tracing paper into the clay to get my base shape. Just kind of stabbing down into it through the paper. And another technique that I learned recently from a more experienced clay crafter is for when I'm mixing clay to have rolled it out in the pasta machine and take a little cutout and then just take it. It doesn't matter the shape of the cutout, but then I can get a pretty exact amount of clay. And then if I wanted that, I could repeat it with a different color so that I can keep track of the ratio pretty well. And then the other tools, and this little box I found at the dollar store, I've got a bunch of little compartments in it, so that's where I'm putting the scraps of pre-mixed clay that I have. You can't see that real well in there. It looks kind of dirty until you bring it out. And at that point, once I've got my cutout, want to smooth down the edges a little. I take one of my dotting tools, which these are called dotting tools, but I always want to call them ball tools, and you can probably see why. The pack came with this many in them, and I don't really see why I need this many. I just couldn't buy fewer of them. I really only use the biggest and the smallest, and I mostly use that for smoothing down the edges of what I've cut out. And with this, the Swiss Army knife, well, not really Swiss Army knife, but a pocket knife, I generally only use the pair of tweezers from it to place little pieces that I want to stick onto the clay without touching the clay with my fingers, because once I've got it smooth, I don't want it picking up fingerprints again. I've also got this sewing kit that I use, which seems kind of weird. That I have both baked clay onto safety pins that were in this to make some pins for my hat, and I have also threaded little balls of clay onto strips to show a color scale of how the two colors blend together, like this red and yellow one. See varying shades of orange. And I was really surprised at how well the clay reacts to the thread and needle that I might even at some point try embroidering my clay. I have no idea if that would work. So, some of my more recent tools that I've gotten, these did not come in a pack together. Well, those all did. This came in a separate pack. I've just been storing it with them. It's what was labeled as a clay blade. It's pretty much a long, flexible razor blade with a handle so that I can push down on it without hurting myself. And so it bends, you can see that. And I can take the handle off of it so that way if I need to push it through a piece of clay that is, excuse me, I have to put the phone down, that is larger than the blade itself, then I can do that, and then I can put the handle back on it. And these were just labeled as clay shapers. I think I've only used one or two out of the package. For these and the dotting tools, I've really never found sufficient information on how I'm supposed to use them. I've pretty much just been using them to smooth down the surface of my clay in areas that I can't really reach with my fingers. I kind of use them as tiny fingertips. It don't work quite as good for smoothing it as just fingers do, but it's good when you can't reach. And lastly, I haven't used much of this, but I've got this steel wire, and I use that as a frame when I'm making a more 3D piece. I'm hoping to get more into that stuff later on. Then, once I've got the clay totally shaped, for the most part I try to make the clay itself the color that I want. But if I'm just plain don't have the clay, or I can't mix it to the right color, or even if I want a variegated effect on the clay, then my next step would be to take these chalk pastels that are older than I am. They're from my mom's junior college days, when and I just take my X-Acto knife and I scrape off some of the chalk directly onto the clay, and I use regular old paint brushes to spread it around and brush it in. At that point, that's when I bake my clay, and once it comes back from the oven, I can then choose to do further bakes on it. But once I have baked it all the times that I'm going to bake it, I then have these paint markers that I can use on it. It would probably be better to use regular paint, but I'm really affected by textures, and I'm trying to avoid using regular paint, and I might at some point use it anyway. But I'm seeing how far I can get with these paint markers. And also, if the surface of the clay is light enough, or even if I put down a white paint marker first, then I will use these regular markers of various brands. I've got Sharpie, Prismacolor, Winsor Newton, Copic, and Artist Loft. I found that the Sharpie seems to work best on the clay. And so those are the different coloring methods I've used so far. In the next segment, I'll show the supplies that I plan to use but have not used yet. I include supplies that I got from my most recent run to the craft store and the dollar store, which so helpfully are almost right next door to each other. Oh, I got these pencil sharpeners just because I have an idea of maybe being able to bake clay around them to decorate them, and maybe even add a receptacle to them so that it can collect the shavings. Big ideas. I don't know if it'll work. And I got these craft sticks. That was something I wasn't intending to buy, but I thought they might come useful somewhere. And I was especially thinking of maybe building a structure where I could lay out a sheet of clay raised up off the table so that I could stitch on it, the embroidery idea I mentioned earlier. Now, this is a Sculpey satin glaze. It's made for the clay, and I've not glazed any of my creations yet. I am only planning to do that if maybe I need to waterproof them. I haven't really researched if this glaze is waterproof, but I would think it should be. And I got a cheap aluminum foil. When I bake my clay, I use a nicer aluminum foil for making a tent over the clay to help prevent it from burning. But I bought a cheap dollar store foil because I'm planning on trying to use foil to... I've seen it in a lot of people's instructions to use foil inside a larger structure to make an armature. And especially if I try to make a ball jointed doll at some point, I need to be able to hollow it out. And one of the YouTube channels that I looked at said that the cheaper aluminum foil was actually better in that case because you could easily cut through it and pull it out of the doll after the shell's been baked. And on the same track of hoping to be able to make some movable pieces with ball joints, there was a channel that suggested getting 2 identical sets of measuring spoons with round holes in them. Because, again, you don't want to use the ones that you use for cooking. And each set was just $1, so this cost me $2. And I'm hoping to be able to make functioning joints with that. That's getting pretty ambitious. I probably won't be to that project for a while. And I will post a link in the description to give credit to the channel that posts that idea. And I have an extra white paint pen because the white paint pen in the pack that I bought is the one that's giving me trouble. All of the other paint pens in that pack seem to work perfectly well. But I think white's probably the color I need the most, and that's the pen that's giving me trouble. So I got a backup just in case. And let's see, gotta make sure this bag is emptied out. I think I got everything out of it. The last things I've gotten there is I got 2 flat paint brushes, which I intend to be specifically for applying the glaze when I get around to doing that. And I bought a few colors that I was having trouble blending. One of them is this bright orange. Whenever I tried to blend my red and my yellow, granted my red is considered a dark red, the blends were all coming out looking like more of a salmon color. And so I bought this orange in case I was unable to get an orange by blending. And then for some reason, the regular clay, the one that they call blue, I showed it to you earlier, is a real light color. And I was expecting one more like this. So I bought this one called Royal Blue for when I'm going to need a darker one. Because I don't know if I could sufficiently darken the other one with black or if that would just turn into mud. And then also, this one was not sold out in the regular red, not just the dark red. So I've got that. That's another pack that I'll open if I really need it. So, in the last segment, I'll show you some of the pieces that I've done. For my first project, I jumped in well over my head trying to make a 3D sculpture that I thought was going to be able to stand. I started with its duck foot, which actually turned out pretty well, but then when I tried putting a leg on it, you can see it leans really far forward. So that was the first problem, and after I realized it wasn't really going to stand, I kind of quit trying on the rest of it. So I think the initial foot and the ears all came out pretty well. The body in between, yeah. But it's my first attempt, so I'm pretty happy with it for that. And I call this creature Die Kaninschente. I first created it in my German 1 class a few years ago when we were learning body parts. It is compound from the words das Kaninchen, rabbit, and die Ente, duck. In a more recent Spanish class, we had to create a creature, and we were given very little time, way too little time. It was an in-class project, and we had something like 5 minutes to draw out the creature. I need that long just to come up with a creature. So I just started drawing Die Kaninchente, and then I had to rename it with a Spanish name, and so now it is also called Patojo. Pato, duck, and ojo, eye. So here are my more recent projects. There's several that I've already given to people, but the oldest one that I haven't given away is this magnet. It is in the image of our Indian runner duck. And then, let's see, the next one I think is this one. The form's pretty good, but then I tried putting hair on it and it goes every which way. To anyone who might be watching this video through Wattpad, you might be able to recognize that it was based upon my profile picture. Then I tried again adding fur to a magnet after it worked so well the first time, and I think this one came out a little better. This is another one of my rabbits, half-sister of the of the inspiration for the other one. Then, next project I think was this one. You can see the base of the duck and its feet are all done with chalk brushed onto the clay before it was baked. And then this was the first project, oh, and the beak. This was the first project that I used my paint pens on. So the darker brown on the body, the glossy purple on the wing, the black trim, the green head, the purple on the head, nostril, all that is done with my paint pens. And I also did this goldfish. Pretty happy with it for the most part, but its fins came out way too blue. I was trying to give them more of a translucent effect, but that came out really blue. I think if I'd gotten a little less chalk on there, it would have worked better. And then the main body is paint pen. This one seems to be a favorite among my family. It's a representation of our budgie, and when I was trying to get a reference photo of her, I didn't know I was going to be doing it upside down, but that's how she decided to pose herself. And then this last one, I don't think my dad watches my videos anyway, but he'd better not watch this until after his birthday, because this is supposed to be for him. It's his fishing buddy, a blue heron. And it's my most recent completed project. The feathers on its chest were the most complicated thing I didn't know how to do. And I ended up following a tutorial for hair to get its thin feathers. And then those other wing indentations I did just by pressing the clay shaper into the clay. Alright, that is the end of this video. I hope it's not too boring for people who come to this channel for other things. See ya. Chair. Stuhl.